Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. Well, it looks like we're into a provincial election campaign, and the last 40 minutes we've spent with Brian Evans and Maria Rio with their book criticizing the Ford government, and I had booked that before the election call, and so I want to make it clear to everyone that I thought it was an interesting discussion. Obviously, is a very interesting book. I challenged them on numerous of the issues they had. I don't agree with everything they said. I don't disagree with everything they said, and I'm going to try to stay objectively neutral in this campaign for obvious reasons. It's difficult for me because I actually ran in the last provincial campaign, as some of you may know, and I feel very strongly about this province. And I ran mainly because I was disappointed with the electoral system, and very disappointed that even though I and other people ran trying to argue that the electoral system had some problems, turnout actually went down. The electoral system, last election, the electoral system got worse. I'm wondering what's going to happen this time. And I think it's because we've got numerous issues. And I'd like to, if I could, spend the next couple of minutes raising the issues that I think that you should consider and ask the potential candidates in your ridings that are running to be your representative as the member of provincial parliament, or frankly, if you get a chance to leaders, what their position on these policies are. And I'm going to try hard not to take a position on them. I'm just going to raise them because, as I said, for reasons that some of you may know, I'm going to try to stay as completely objective and neutral on this election campaign as possible. I've got 12 issues for you. Number one, the Trump tariffs. I do think that this is probably the closest to a economic calamity facing Ontario and Canada that has existed since the financial crisis in the 1990s, and how we're going to address the threat of Trump's tariffs, and if they come to pass, what we're going to do about it, I think is the most important issue facing Canada and Ontario. And so the strategy, if they come to pass, the strategy to negotiate, if they come to pass, how to deal with it and combat that and protect the Canadian and Ontarian individual and worker and job and company, I think is going to be key, just like it was in the pandemic, just like it was in the Great Recession, just like it was in the 1990s. And I think we need government to take action comparable to what Paul Martin and Jean Chrétien did in the 1990s during the Canadian peso crisis. So that's number one. And that's obvious. Second, housing affordability. Our young people can't afford homes. Newcomers can't afford homes. Renters can't afford homes. The only people that can afford homes are people that have already got homes that enjoyed the inflationary time periods over the course of the last decade and a bit, as home prices now are out of reach for the vast majority of people, are twice the level of a ratio of personal disposable income as they are in the United States, as they should be. We are at, if not above, the levels that the United States was in 2008 before their housing bubble crashed. And we didn't have that bubble burst. And it's a problem. And it's caused, I think, by government red tape, regulations, development fees, taxes, etc. And so therefore, how we deal with the housing crisis and housing affordability or lack thereof is an issue. Otherwise, we're going to continue to have outmigration to Calgary, to small towns, to the United States, and we're going to have the Manhattanization of Toronto. Productivity and prosperity, our real incomes, real disposable incomes haven't increased in 10 or 15 years. During the Dalton McGuinty years, we had the Institute for Competitiveness and Prosperity. We used to have people that were in government that were really interested in jobs, in productivity and prosperity. And that business orientation, I think we need to have a focus on, and how are we going to increase our productivity and prosperity, our real disposable incomes, et cetera. Because if we don't have growth in incomes, how can we grow our tax base? How can we grow our social services, et cetera? It all comes from the growth of wealth eventually. I think intergenerational inequity is a real issue. And yesterday I had a show with a young man who has written a book and written several articles on this topic. And I think if we don't address the intergenerational inequity, where we've built up a system with high debt, high taxes, lack of investment in infrastructure, housing and affordability, such that our young people have lost the Canadian dream, the Ontario dream, the dream of home ownership, the dream of a prosperous future, of being able to raise a family, I think we could have some real challenges, civil unrest, and apathy, voter apathy, and young people that just leave, give up. Healthcare is an issue. Funding of healthcare, hospitals, access to doctors, it's an issue that we need to address. I think an issue that hasn't gone as publicized as it could and should be is long-term care. I think that as baby boomers age, we are headed to a tsunami of elderly people needing a place to age, and we're not going to have either the institutional opportunities for them to go into a senior's home, and or the long-term care workers for them to age in their own home. And it's coming, and it's coming real soon. Infrastructure. I think if the provincial government is responsible for anything, it's for infrastructure, and I think that we need to have an infrastructure plan. Transit and transportation. I think that the Eglinton Crosstown, the Hazel McCallion, LRT, the Ontario line are all great, but they're all, it would appear, over budget, behind schedule. And I think that we need far more investment in transit and in transportation. I wonder why we don't have a 4-lane freeway going all the way from Peterborough, the end of the 407, all the way to Ottawa. I wonder why we don't have another 4-lane going from Western Toronto up to Collingwood or Owen Sound. I think that if we were in the United States and we had the interstate transportation system, the highway system, we would have a far better highway system than we currently do. There's been complaints about tunneling under the 401. I'm not sure if that makes sense, but I think that access to downtown Toronto was an issue, and whether it's a tunnel or somehow getting some sort of an expansion of the Don Valley Parkway, the Gardiner, etc. I've seen proposals that would solve that problem. Toronto needs to have better access, and it's got to come from a combination of transit and transportation. Otherwise, Toronto is not going to be the economic center that it could and should be. I think that this missing link that Ford talked about a week or two ago that would allow the CP rail traffic off of the Milton Mississauga line and it to be used by GO Transit is something worth considering. Electrical power, hydropower, nuclear power has got to be an issue that people address. Taxes. I don't think we have competitive taxes. I think our taxes are too high. And when you think about what Trump is going to be doing in the United States, companies, people are going to move to the States if we don't have a competitive tax system. And we've addressed that in the past. We need to consider it going forward. Policing. Peel police budget went up by something like 23%. Toronto budget, police budget went up. Crimes, we see home invasions on a fairly regular basis. We see carjackings on a fairly regular basis. Guns are more prevalent in our communities than they've ever been before. Policing, safety, crime has got to be an issue. Ring of Fire, we've been talking about for 2 decades, and how are we going to exploit the natural resources? I think critical minerals are going to become even more important as we think about Trump tariffs, if we think about the geopolitical system worldwide, if we think about what China, India, Russia, Georgia, Kazakhstan are doing in regards to their critical minerals, uranium, etc. We need a plan on and what we're going to do to exploit appropriately those resources and ensure that Ontario, Canada, are the sources of natural resources that we need and want them to be. And I think I'll add one last one if I could. I really wonder whether we've got an Ontario spirit. I think about going to Ontario Place and watching films of North of Superior at the Cinesphere, of that song Ontario Aereo. Do we have an identity in Ontario anymore? I think Alberta does. I think Quebec does. Do we have it in Ontario? Do we have an identity? Do we have a spirit? Not just of Ontario, of Canada. I think that the Premier of Ontario should and could be a champion for Canada, a champion for Ontario. And how do we define that? And then I think we need reform of our electoral system. And I fought on that during the last provincial campaign. I'm not going to have that opportunity this time. But if we don't increase the turnout from the dismal levels of the last campaign, the last electoral campaign in Ontario. I think it's going to be only older, richer people, homeowners that are going to be voting, and everyone else is going to be so apathetic. And that can only lead to an undemocratic system long term. People, if they don't feel like their voice is being heard, if they don't feel like they've got an influence on what's happening, are going to vote with their feet and leave, or they're going to look for civil unrest. Anyway, those are my 12 issues that I think need to be raised during the next month of this electoral campaign. And again, I'm not going to take a position one way or the other as who would be best to deal with them, but I think they need to be dealt with. My 2 cents as we start an electoral campaign for the provincial government in Ontario. Thanks for listening. I remind you I'm on every Monday through Friday at 6 o'clock on 960 AM. You can stream me online at www.saga960am.ca. All my podcasts and videos are on my website, briancrombie.com. Good night, everybody.